Fudge-a-mania, Chapter 10, Green Gurgling Gas. On Wednesday, Sheila got a phone call during breakfast. As soon as she hung up, she started bawling. "What's wrong, honey?" Fudge asked. "My friend Mouse Elise has chickenpox and can't come to Maine." Grandma put her arm around Sheila. "You must be terribly disappointed." "I am," Sheila wailed. "Everything happens to me. Why does it have to be my friend who gets sick? Why couldn't Jimmy Fargo get chickenpox instead?" "Jimmy had chickenpox in second grade," I said. "Don't you remember? We all had them." That made Sheila cry even harder. "But it's so unfair." "Where is it written that life is fair?" Grandma asked. "It's all ups and downs, isn't it, Buzzy?" Buzzy Senior nodded. "These things happen," he told Sheila. "That's when I burped. I didn't mean to. It just came out. Probably I drank my orange juice too fast." Sheila glared at me. "I heard that, Peter." "Heard what?" I asked. "That stupid laugh," Sheila said. "That was no laugh. That was a burp." Sheila turned to Buzzy Senior. "Grandpa, make him stop. He's so mean. He's glad Mouse can't come to Maine." Before I had the chance to explain, Tootsie flicked a spoonful of oatmeal across the table. It landed on Sheila's face, halfway between her mouth and eyes. "You see," Sheila cried. "You see how everything happens to me?" "It's just oatmeal," Grandma said, handing Sheila a piece of paper towel. "That's not the point." Sheila turned and ran from the room. "I sure hope things would improve before tonight when Jimmy Fargo gets here." After breakfast, Mom helped me get my room ready for Jimmy. She moved Fudge's things down the hall into the room Grandma is sharing with Tootsie. She set up a roll-away bed for Fudge right next to Tootsie's crib. "I hate crowding you in like this," Mom said to Grandma. "I don't mind," Grandma said. "Sleeping in the same room with my grandchildren is a privilege. It's a lot more fun than sleeping in a room by myself." "You should get married, Grandma," Fudge said. "Then you wouldn't have to sleep in a room by yourself." He jumped on the roll-away bed. "That bed isn't designed for jumping," Mom told him. "It's going to collapse if you don't stop." Fudge tumbled off the bed like some Olympic gymnast and landed on his feet. "If I try that, I'd probably break a leg." "Do you still snore, Grandma?" he asked. "Fudgy," Mom said. "That's not a polite question." But Grandma didn't mind. She said, "I don't really know, Fudge. You'll have to tell me." "Snoring keeps the monsters away," he said. "Yes," Grandma said. "I'm sure it does." "When I get married, I won't have monsters in my room," Fudge said. "Says who?" I asked. You don't get monsters when you sleep in a bed with someone else." "That's why you want to get married," I said, "so you won't get monsters in your bed?" "Why else would I get married?" "You should talk to Mitzi," I told them. "She's got monster spray." "Monster spray?" "Mitzi's monster spray," I said in a deep voice, trying out my commercial. "Made from a grandmother's secret formula. Spray twice a day and melt your monsters away." "Really, Peter?" Mom said. But Fudge liked the idea. He jumped back onto the roll-away bed and bounced up and down singing, "Monster spray melts your monsters away." "Fudgy," Mom warned, but it was too late. Both ends of the roll-away bed sprang up, catching Fudge in the middle. I imagined the headline in tonight's paper, "5-year-old flattened by roll-away bed." "Get me out of here," Fudge yelled. "Okay, okay." Mom and Grandma held the bed apart, and I pulled him out. "Stupid, stupid bed," Fudge cried, kicking it. "If you do that to me again, I'm going to chop you up into little bits." "Let's not blame the bed," Mom said. Later, when we were out in the backyard, Fudge told Buzzy Senior what had happened. "Those beds can be very tricky," Buzzy Senior said. Fudge nodded. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Do you snore, Buzzy?" "I used to snore," Buzzy Senior said, as if Fudge's question were perfectly natural. "But since I sleep alone now, I really don't know." "How come you sleep alone?" "Because my wife died." Fudge got the serious look on his face. You could tell he was thinking hard, and after a minute his face lit up and he said, "You should sleep with Grandma." "Fudge," Mom said. "Well, they're best friends," Fudge told her, "like Pete and Jimmy. And Jimmy's going to sleep in Pete's room, right?" Buzzy Senior and Grandma looked at each other and laughed. That afternoon, the sky turned gray and it started to drizzle. The Tubmans decided to drive to Bar Harbor. That's the town where all the tourists go. It's got hundreds of little shops selling t-shirts with sayings like "Maine, cool as a moose in Bar Harbor," or "Maine, 50 miles from nowhere." "Count me out," Libby said. "I've got to be at work by 3. "Count me out, too," Sheila said. "The Hatchers depend on me to babysit Fudge." But Mom convinced Sheila she deserved an afternoon off. If you ask me, everyone was feeling sorry for the Cootie Queen just because Mouse got sick and couldn't come to Maine. Everyone but me, that is. Still, I felt relieved when the Tubmans left. I hope they go out for a pizza and catch a late movie, I thought. I hope they like the action of Bar Harbor so much they decide to stay for a week. They still weren't back when Mr. Fargo called from town, asking Mom for directions to the house. That was a good sign because then it was after 6. I waited on the porch. When I saw Mr. Fargo's truck, I ran down to the road. His truck is really old, with rust spots around the fenders. It's painted the color of bile. Not that I've ever seen bile, but last year in school we learned about the digestive system, and that's what I imagined it, a sickish greenish brown color. Turtle barked. "It's Jimmy," I told him, as I waved Mr. Fargo into our driveway. At first, Jimmy couldn't get out of the truck. The door on his side wouldn't budge. He kicked it a couple of times and then banged it with his shoulder. Finally, it creaked open. By then, we were laughing. Turtle jumped up and tried to lick Jimmy's face. "Good boy, nice doggy," Jimmy said, patting him. "Turtle knows a friend when he sees one," I said. Jimmy gave me a bear hug and we slapped hands. It was great to see him. But that didn't stop me from checking over my shoulder. I hoped the Tubmans wouldn't show up now. Jimmy also took a look around. "You were right," he said. "You can't even see Sheila's house from here. I guess it's through those woods over there." "Well, see," I began. But then Mom opened the front door and called to us. Inside, Dad had a fire going in the big stone fireplace. Fudge was stretching out on the floor with his Crayolas, illustrating chapter 1 of his book. Tootsie was scooting around on her toddle bike, and Grandma was reading. She put down her book to greet Mr. Fargo. Jimmy headed straight for Uncle Feather's cage. "Bonjour, stupid," he said. "Bonjour, stupid," Uncle Feather answered. Jimmy laughed. Good old Uncle Feather. Good old Uncle Feather. "Please, Jimmy," Mom said, "don't encourage him. Once you get him going, it's hard to turn him off." "Turn him off! Turn him off!" "See what I mean?" Mom asked. "See what I mean? See what I mean?" I motioned for Jimmy to sneak away from Uncle Feather's cage. Jimmy got down on all fours and crawled across the living room, out of Mr. Feather's sight. As he did, Tootsie held her arms out to Mr. Fargo. "Up," she said, "up." Mr. Fargo lifted her high above his head and shook her. Tootsie loved that. She has this thing for bearded men. She'll raise her arms and say "up" to any guy with a beard. Mom says it's because Dad used to have one, but I'm not so sure. We're going to have to teach her to be more careful. I can just see her walking down Broadway in a few years, holding her arms to every bearded weirdo in the street. Mom took Tootsie from Mr. Fargo. "Thanks for driving Jimmy all this way, Frank," she said. "I know what a long trip it is." "He used to come up here in the old days," Mr. Fargo said, "with my ex-wife. You remember my ex-wife, don't you?" Uh-oh, I thought. I hope he's not going to start in on Mrs. Fargo, because Jimmy really hates it when he does. "How about something to drink, Frank?" Dad asked. I was glad he changed the subject. "Some fizzy water, if you have it," Mr. Fargo said, coming right up. Mom smiled, but I could tell she was tense. A lot of people get tense around Mr. Fargo. I think it's because he never smiles, even when he's trying to be friendly. "How about this Maine weather?" Mom asked. "You have to have weather, whether or not," Mr. Fargo said. Jimmy groaned. "Dad, that's so bad." I heard a car pull into the driveway. Oh no, I thought, not now. The car doors slammed, and a minute later the Tubmans came bounding in the porch steps and into the house. Sheila headed straight for the fire. "It's so cold and damp," she began. She stopped when she saw Jimmy. "Oh, it's you." "What's she doing here?" Jimmy asked. "I'll explain later," I whispered. But Sheila explained for me. "I happen to live here. This happens to be my house." "I thought this was your house," Jimmy said to me. "Well, see," I began. "We share the living room and the kitchen," Sheila said. "We eat breakfast and dinner together every day." Jimmy looked at me. "I don't get it." "It's like two houses in one," I told him. "It's like they're connected." "Connected?" Jimmy said. "Yeah, joined together," I said. I looked over at Sheila. She was enjoying this. "Joined together?" Jimmy said. Sheila laughed out loud. I glared at her. "See, our families live over there," I explained, pointing to our side of the house, "and her family lives over here, and the living room and the kitchen are sort of in the middle." Jimmy just stood there with his mouth half open. Sheila picked Jake up and started kissing her. "Isn't my dog adorable?" she asked Jimmy between smooches. "I thought you're afraid of dogs," Jimmy said. "She is," I told him. "That's not true," Sheila said. "I just don't like big smelly dogs." Turtle, who was asleep in the corner, raised his head. "Attack," I told him mentally. But he didn't get my message. He just scratched himself and went back to sleep. Sheila carried Jake over to Jimmy and put her in his arms. "Rubber belly, she loves that." Jimmy held Jake like a baby. "She's so soft." This was too much. I was glad when Dad called. "Dinner's almost ready. Pasta with Anne's special sauce." Mr. Fargo suddenly came to life and said, "Better get our things inside, Jimmy." When Jimmy and his father went out to the car, Mom said, "Did he say our things?" He means Jimmy's things," I told her. "I hope so," Mom said, looking worried. But when Jimmy carried one duffel bag into the house and Mr. Fargo carried another. "I don't have much," Mr. Fargo said, "just this and my art supplies." "You're planning to stay with us?" Mom asked. "No point trying to camp out in this weather," Mr. Fargo told her. From the look on Mom's face, I thought she might faint. There was a long, awkward silence. Finally, Dad said, "You can have the sofa in here, Frank. It's the only available space left." "Unless Grandma sleeps with Buzzy Senior," Fudge said. "Then I can sleep in Grandma's bed and Mr. Fargo can have the rollaway." Everyone looked at Fudge, including Mr. Fargo. "Don't go to any trouble," he said. "This sofa looks mighty good to me." Later, when Jimmy and I were in the bathroom getting ready for bed, he said, "I'm really embarrassed about my father. Anyone can see you've already got too many people in this house." "It's no big deal." I handed him a clean towel. "Yeah, right. That's how come your mom almost fainted." "Only because we're out of beds," I said. "You think my father cares about beds? He likes to sleep on the floor." "It's okay. Forget it." Jimmy spit out toothpaste. You know he's weird. He doesn't mean to be, but he is. "He's not that weird." I flushed the toilet, which reminded me of my poison gas story. "Look," I said, "I'm embarrassed too. I should have told you about sharing a house with the Tubmans, but I didn't find out until we got up here. And then, well, I was afraid if I told you, you wouldn't come." "I probably wouldn't have," Jimmy said, "but now that I'm here, it doesn't seem that bad." I was glad I wouldn't have to lie to Jimmy after all, and tell him the truth wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. Still, I couldn't help wondering how would have reacted to my story. I decided to find out. As soon as we were in bed, I said, "Did you hear about the poison gas?" "What poison gas?" "The poison gas in the toilets." "What toilets?" "Some guy up here, he has poison gas in all of his toilets." "What do you mean poison gas?" Jimmy faced me and propped himself up on his elbow. "It was this green, steamy, gurgling stuff that bubbled up every time he flushed." "Green, steamy, gurgling stuff." Jimmy started to laugh. "It's not funny," I said. "It's an environmental disaster." "An environmental disaster?" Jimmy said. "Where did you read that? In the National Enquirer?" "You don't think it's possible?" "Yeah, I think it's possible, if the guy ate something that didn't agree with him." Jimmy broke up laughing. "Ha ha," I said, as I reached over and turned out the light. "Ha ha," a voice repeated, but it wasn't Jimmy. I jumped out of the bed and opened the door. Fudge was sitting on the floor right outside my room. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "I don't know." "Didn't anyone ever tell you you're not supposed to listen to private conversations?" "No." I picked him up and turned him upside down. I held him that way until his face turned purple. "Put me down, Pete." "Not until you promise never to do that again." "Okay, I promise." I didn't believe him for a second, but I put him down anyway. "Now go to bed." "I can't." "Why not?" "I'm afraid of the rollaway." "The rollaway can't hurt you." "Yes, it can. It mashed me. So I'll sleep in here with you and Jimmy." "No, you won't." I carried him down the hall and dropped him on the rollaway bed. Grandma and Tootsie were already asleep. Fudge listened to Grandma, who was snoring softly. "No monsters tonight," he whispered, pointing in her direction. "Right," I whispered back. "Now go to sleep." "Tuck me in," he said. I tucked him in. "Now kiss me good night." I was about to drop a light one on his forehead when he reached up, grabbed me around the neck, and pulled me down. Then he planted a big wet smackaroo right in the middle of my face. "Sweet dreams, Pete."